I think Shotzzy's got a lot of room for improvement on this game, and I think so does Dashy.
If you look at Toronto, they are doing all the extra outside of the game stuff to another level compared to these other organizations.
They should have far more first places than they do second places, and I think it kind of is a stain on their legacy.
Welcome back to the reverse sweep. Make sure you guys go to prizepicks.com/reverse sweep and use code reverse sweep for a first deposit match for up to $100. We're fresh off a fantastic weekend here at Major 1. I'm here with my two co-hosts, Pat and Chris. The first stage of the CDL is finished and Toronto Ultra are champions. I know Pat's happy about that. He loves Toronto, but how did the event go as you guys expected?
I thought it was a really good event overall. I don't know where New York went. That one kind of blew my mind. I guess Rocker took their place for this event, but overall, I thought we got some really good games. I'm glad we got more of these top 4 matchups, and I think now we can finally get a better idea of maybe where these teams sit in a tier list, and maybe we'll do that in a future episode. But it was a good weekend.
Yeah, I was pleased with how the weekend went and had a lot of amazing matches. It kind of sucks that the Sunday was a little bit of a wash for the most part with most of the matches. However, the matches leading up to that point, there was a lot of upsets. Obviously, Rocker made a run, LAG and Ravens made a tiny little run as well. So seeing some of these teams that people kind of underrated or didn't really see going far, making some decent runs and causing some upsets was pretty awesome to watch. But yeah, it was a great weekend, man.
Yeah, I think for me, like the first event of the year is always one of those ones where you come in and it sets the standard for the entirety of the season. And I think for me, like coming into this event, we were all kind of saying the same thing where you see the teams like Toronto, you see the teams like FaZe, they're all like a step above, from, in my opinion, from 3rd to 12th. I think the 3rd to 12th, all those guys can trade wins against each other. FaZe and Ultra are just a step above those guys. So I think that that kind of like solidified that for us this weekend. You know, all those predictions, all those kind of conversation we had going in. We had, obviously, all of our predictions. We had FaZe Ultra in the finals, and it showed. I mean, there was a massive golfing class in terms of those teams and the rest. So I think for us, it kind of confirmed everything. For me, I think OpTic obviously coming in and having a great performance here was a big deal as well, because you know, they had a bunch of up and down performances online. They had days where they looked unbeatable. They had days they looked terrible. And I think this weekend they came in, they've got the fans behind them, and they kind of returned to that OpTic that, you know, you think they can be. And at the same time though, if you're an OpTic fan, you want them to be winning tournaments. You want them to be in the same conversation as Ultra and FaZe. So it's one of those weird ones for OpTic fans. They're probably sitting there like, disappointed, but at the same time I think it's a good result for them this weekend. So what do you guys think about OpTic's performance this weekend anyway?
I mean, they got their revenge right against Miami, and then they had 2 good series, I believe, Surge and Rocker. I mean, they did what they had to do, right? And that was what we were doubting a little bit from the online stage was, you know, are they going to come in and not get upset? And they did. I mean, they beat who they had to beat, and then they played FaZe pretty close the first time, I would say. You know, going down, getting Neslo'd by FaZe is always kind of a shocker because, you know, how much talent is on FaZe. We expect them to dominate hardpoints every time. But they managed to take 2 off of them. And then, yeah, on Sunday morning, it was just a little bit different story. FaZe, I think, had their number in the respawns, and I think it was just almost like a skill diff, though, a little bit on Sunday. You know, that FaZe team is scary when they get hot, and I think, you know, outside of Pred, the rest of that squad didn't really show up in that series, and that's kind of what I was let down by. I mean, Pred, I'll give him his flowers. Like, he looked like LeBron all weekend. You know, no matter what, he fried almost every single map. So that was impressive. He probably had one of the more consistent tournaments for that, you know, SMG style role, outside of obviously our MVP CleanX. But yeah, I mean, I thought OpTic's probably happy with, you know, locking down their 3rd spot. But still, I think there's a ways to go for them to catch up for the top 2 dogs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much on the same page as you, Pat. My thing was, it was good to see them, like, obviously be competitive and, like, get to Sunday, simply because, obviously, there was question marks going into the weekend, whether they were going to be able to achieve that with some of the other teams looking a little bit better and more consistent than they were. But at the end of the day, they do end up getting a Sunday. But once we got there, man, like, yeah, they had that close match against FaZe on Saturday, but outside of that, I just didn't see a way that they beat like FaZe or Toronto, like that whole Sunday. Like they just they're just not that like good in S&D, and I feel like Toronto and FaZe are both really great S&D teams, and then their Hardpoint, yeah, it's pretty good, but obviously whenever Kenny is not having an insane series like he has been lately, you start to kind of see the flaws on this roster with players like Dashy, players like Shotzzy just not performing as well as you might expect some of those players to do. I think Shotzi's got a lot of room for improvement on this game, and I think so does Dashy. They haven't looked like themselves, like at least from a consistency perspective on the last couple of matches that we've watched. And for if they want to win a tournament this year, which I'm assuming is their goal, right? They ended up actually bringing on some superstar talent to help them achieve that. They need to step up their game because with the amount of talent that they have, they should at least be having competitive series with these two top teams every single time, not just once.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that if you look at this team coming into the season, you're putting them in the conversation. Like, you want to see them grand finals, you want to see them in winners finals, you want to see them like pushing these teams. But at the end of the day, they just came in, and obviously they did look like the third best team, but at the same time, they didn't look like they could compete against Ultra and FaZe. And I think that's the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway, because coming into this event, they were obviously underperforming, and they did at the same time overperform, I guess, their expectations coming in. But at the same time, you rewind to the off season and you're expecting these guys to be in the finals, or at least in the conversation. And I think that although they got third, I think there's still like a bit of a gap between those guys and FaZe and Ultra, and I think that's something that they need to really, really nail down on going into this next stage, because I think that the game's going to completely change now. You've got a bunch of hardpoint changes, you've got a bunch of opportunities here to rewatch all the VOD and fine-tune things in terms of S&D and control. But at the end of the day, I think that they're one of those teams that they can be in that conversation, but they don't have the same teamwork at the same time as those other guys. So I think it's
something that's interesting, though. Like we obviously we're talking about these guys being our defined top three, right? And I think we can all say that Ultra is for sure number one. They're ahead of FaZe, and FaZe is for sure ahead of OpTic. Yeah. But I want to see an OpTic versus Ultra matchup. Like, I'm really curious. Like, I do think Ultra is the better team, but we've seen this before in years past where it's like sometimes in our top three, like A will be better than B, but C will be better than A. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, it's not always
matchup based. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so I'm curious if OpTic could put up a better fight than we saw FaZe do against Ultra.
That's true. That's a good point. I think the matchups are a big thing, COD, like historically, like you have maybe their strongest maps tailored to OpTic, and then OpTic come in, they can win both hard points. Maybe they grind out an S&D, and then you see them winning against a team like Ultra. But yeah, I think it's one of those ones where it just depends on the improvement that OpTic make coming into this next major, if you do intend to see that. But at the end of the day, all these teams need to be able to perform against whoever. If you want to win, you got to have a system, you got to have a plan that can beat against every single team. And I think that OpTic, although they look great, they obviously have a lot of deficiencies in certain areas.
Which I think is also where New York struggled, right? Like New York, they were supposed to be our top 4 team. They came in and got double first rounded. And they beat teams that, arguably, like, they should never lose to, or they lost to teams they should never lose to. So yeah, I mean, out of them, it's multiple teams obviously that need to come home and absolutely grind for these next 2 off weeks that they have before the league matches start back up, and figure out this new patch, and just kind of honestly, I mean, we talked about this before, learn from what Ultra's doing right. I mean, Ultra look clear cut above everybody, and I think every single team has something to learn from these guys, and they have a whole weekend of footage to do so. So I'm curious to see what these teams do when they get home.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. Agreed.
And before we go into our PrizePicks segment, I want to talk about the FaZe finals record, because I think that is an interesting stat. The FaZe guys in grand finals are 7-12, which I think most of us would consider aBeZy Simp one of the greatest, if not the greatest duo of all time, and FaZe one of the greatest Call of Duty teams of all time. But whatever reason, they've been in multiple grand finals and they're not able to translate that performance that you see online to the main stage where it comes down to those crunch moments of grand finals. And why do you think that is? Like, is there any particular reason, or do you think it's just one of those ones where maybe they've been favoured in certain finals and they've just came in and, threw a few away, but they've choked a few at the same time? Or is there another issue? Or is it just completely just a fugazi stat? What do you guys think?
Honestly, bro, like, it's one of those things where we can probably look at it from so many angles, and
Yeah.
I'll bring up a couple because I mean it could be mapped. It could be mapped, like map. What is it called? A map, like map strength, like having a big map pool. That's
Yeah.
what it is. Whenever they get to those best of sevens, those best of nines, whatever the hell the format changed over the years, maybe they just struggle in that sense where they're either not doing their vetoes properly, or maybe their map pool isn't as deep as we might think it is whenever they're playing against some of these teams, or maybe they just choke. Maybe they're just choking under pressure. And like, they did have a lot of championship wins in the past. Obviously, they still have a lot of championship wins, but nowadays, I think some of the teams that they're playing, they're just a lot more stacked. So they're giving them a run for their money. It also could be tournament endurance, right? At the end of the day, like, these teams can be very good throughout a whole tournament, but as the weekend progresses and progresses and progresses, obviously that takes a toll on your mental, right? You have to sleep through every single one of those days in those tournaments, and at the end of the tournament, some of these players can get probably tired. That could also be a thing. I mean, I don't really know what it is. I mean, at the end of the day, like, we watch how they perform and their consistency factor. The fact that they're getting there is incredible, but they're obviously not closing them out as consistently as you might think. A team as dominant as FaZe is, right, with the rest of the record being so good. I don't know. What do you think, Pat?
Well, I guess my first thing is, like, this is part of the reason that, like, this FaZe dynasty gets, like, degraded a little bit, right, comparing the other two dynasties that we've had, because of their finals pedigree. They obviously get there a hell of a lot. They've had an absolutely dominant run in the CDL era, but you would expect that they have a winning record when they get to the finals. They should have far more first places than they do second places. And I think it kind of is a little bit of a stain on their legacy. It's also a reason that they've made some roster changes in the past, right? They started with Alec, they went to Slasher, they now wanted more power, they get Drazah. It is a weird stat, and it doesn't really make sense. It's just one of those things where, like, they just don't seem to clutch up in the grand finals, and I'll even take out the finals and say Sunday, right? Like, they look like a completely different team on the first 3 days of the tournament than they do on Sunday. And, that could have multiple factors. They're obviously playing better teams on Sunday than they are before, but they online, they go flawless half the time. Maybe they lose one series. So I'm really not sure what it is about this squad and not being able to ice up on Sundays and just, play at their peak, which we know they have. I don't think they played at their peak this weekend. Ultra just outclassed them. So yeah, I don't know if it'll ever get solved. It was one thing in Vanguard when they, like, lost every single finals they got to, right? Like, it was like, what the hell is going on? Like, how is this happening? But yeah, maybe they'll turn that around this year. It's going to be tough though with Ultra looking as good as they do.
No, 100%. I think that both those teams are going to be battling it all season. I think it's going to be one of those ones where we maybe see, FaZe winning an event. We maybe see Ultra, like, trading off events, those two together. But I think at the end of the day, you're going to probably see those teams, like, battle out towards the end of every single tournament. So I'm looking forward to seeing how the rest of the season goes. But at the same time, it's one of those ones where I hope to God that the rest of the sort of pack, I guess, improves, because right now it's looking like Ultra FaZe, and then the rest of the teams are just kind of shit. And I've spoke to, like, I'm here at Boston myself, and I've spoke to a lot of teams and I've spoken to a lot of players, and most of the guys are saying the exact same thing. They think the Ultra and FaZe, they're in their own league, and then everyone else is kind of dog shit. And that just comes from even the players themselves on certain teams are saying that they think that everyone else is kind of, in those situations where they're all beatable, everyone's beatable and everyone's confident, but against FaZe Ultra they're not as confident. But yeah, it's one of those ones where I think that throughout the season we're going to consistently see these teams continue to improve, but I'd like to see, the other squads definitely put up more of a fight.
So sadly, it's like FaZe, we are not clutching up in our prize picks. Our entry did not win. We unfortunately lost, and it was the most insane loss with accuracy. He obviously did not have less than 45.5 kills. I don't know what to say. I don't even know if I can blame us. All our other picks looked absolutely great. And then that New York Rocker series from day one was an absolute shit show. And somehow, by the way, the control, that game 3 control they had ended up going round 5 after all those restarts. And he ended up having like 35 kills alone in that map. So that definitely definitely bit us in the ass. But I thought our other picks were solid. I was feeling really confident after the first matchup when Assault had 22 kills in the entire series, but yeah, unfortunately we did not do so hot. What do you guys think about our result?
I was pretty happy with our picks. I think that we made some smart choices. At the end of the day, anomalies happen and we were incorrect again. But I think if you kind of like look back at the games and look at our predictions, I think we're pretty solid apart from that point. But I think at the end of the day, it's one of those ones where Lamar, he just had to have a World Star series, and he did.
He stepped it up the entire weekend. So
yeah,
I mean, I don't know, we just couldn't foresee it. It's kind of sad that we picked him, and he ended up hitting that. But it's just one of those days, man. Every dog has their day, but everyone else hit that with flying colors, bro. Every single one of our picks outside of that was great.
Yeah.
I mean, look. We obviously have not had a hot start to this, but we got a whole season. We got obviously more matches coming up, more entries to be placed. I do have confidence that we will get hot, go on a little win streak. Lucky for us, PrizePicks is really simple to play. We can get our picks and submit our entries in less than 60 seconds. So speaking of those next picks, let's jump over to the schedule for mid-February when we'll be back. We got a bunch of matches that we can pick from. First ones are the Miami Heretics against the Toronto Ultra, the Carolina Royal Ravens against the New York Subliners. Anything that jumps out to you guys on players? We want to stick to our same strategy of main ARs. What are we thinking?
We're taking the Lucky Less for the
Lucky
third time.
Less is a hundo.
It hits every time. Lucky Less hits every time.
Yeah, I'm fully all in on the Lucky Less. I mean, you know me. I had a ticket for the Miami Heretics, and then I got off the train, then I got back on the train, and then this weekend I don't know what's going on. They're a roller coaster of a team. 2 weeks ago we were like, oh, maybe they've just kind of hit their ceiling. Then they come in, they go 3-0, 3-0, and we're going into the major thinking, oh, these guys might mess around and finish top 3. I'm hearing off other teams that they're like one of the best teams in the game, blah, blah, blah. And then they come in and get double 3-0'd. So I really just don't know what to say about Miami Heretics. But one thing we know that is consistent is Lucky on the West. So I'm thinking Lucky on the West for sure in that first series.
Alrighty. What about anybody on Ultra that they play? Do we want to take CleanX more? That's usually been our bread and butter.
Problem is, like, if it's a speed run, then like we end
That's
up
a good point.
Yeah,
losing
I
out.
think I'm scared of the speed run after the event. I feel like Toronto are going to come in, they're going to write off the momentum, and they're going to come in and just destroy Miami. So,
whoa.
I mean,
then in that case, maybe an insight less, a speed run.
We may as well go Lucky Less at that point.
No, I'm saying both.
Well, what other series are there?
We're already doubling down.
Well, think about it. We're predicting a speed run, right? A quick 3-0. Not a lot of kills to be had. Like, I don't think Insight. Like, think about it. Insight's coming off the event win. He's gonna be feet up, just chilling. They're gonna beat these guys, no problem. Quick 3-0.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, Mark. We got room to make up here.
Yeah, you're not wrong. The thing is, I'm just not comfortable with it. I feel like we should just go like a more simple one this week. I feel like we should just go like 2 or 3
Bring
picks.
it back. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the next one is the Royal Ravens against the Subliners.
Yeah.
This one. What player on the Ravens are we picking for less?
I'm thinking Tyler Fellow less.
Yeah,
I mean, he was probably
their
one of their best players this weekend, though. He
That
did
was
have
only on land.
He's on lane now, though.
Oh, okay. So we're saying he's ass online.
Yes.
I'm saying Tyler's a LAN player.
Yeah.
Like I know Tyler. I think he's a great LAN player. I'm thinking maybe comes back online. He's feeling a bit rusty. Has a bad performance. What are your thoughts?
I could see that.
I can see that as well.
Wait, listen. I think we definitely take the Tyler Fellow less, and then on top of that, we're playing a new patch, and I think the gameplay is a little bit slower now. So I think
Depends what maps they play as well. Like, that's what I mean. Like, right now, we really do not know what maps that some of these guys are going to be good on, or what maps they're going to want to play. So we could,
what about,
in theory, see them spawning into some Karachi mixers, and then we've just absolutely messed up our choices. But
so I like the Tyler Fellow less, but think about this. New York Subliners is coming off a 12th place finish, right? No way any of those guys are happy with that. What about we take a Hydra more to double down with the Tyler Fellow less in this series? No matter if it's a 3-0 smoke show, I think Hydra comes out and plays out of his mind. I think he hits the more. What do we think?
I'm liking that. I've seen Hydra kicking about the event. He's looking a bit mad. He's looking like he's ready for some vengeance. So I'm down. I am so down for that. I think Hydra's going to come in correct in this next series. So yeah, I'm down for Hydra hitting the more, Tyler Fellow hitting less, and then Lucky hitting less as well. I think that's looking like it's looking tasty. I think that for
Does that get us back?
Yeah, I think we're going to come back.
Chris, thoughts? We good with that?
I like it, yeah.
All right, so this next week on PrizePicks, we'll be selecting Lucky less, Hydra more, and Tyler Fellow less. As always, go to prizepicks.com/reverse sweep and use code reverse sweep for a first deposit match up to $100.
Lovely. What do you guys think about like the rest of this competition then? I think that for me right now, we obviously talked about it at the start of the show. I think that everyone else, apart from FaZe and Ultra, are just really bad. I think that all the teams have massive amounts of improvement to make. There's no real teams that have like okay, this team are really strong on S&D, this team are really strong on Hardpoint, this team need to work on this. I feel like everyone else is kind of average at everything, and then you have FaZe and Ultra who are kind of strong across the board. So for me, that's a kind of worrying sign when it comes to the league. I think that we have a situation now where you need these other teams, the likes of OpTic, to improve on Surgeon's Troy. But then you have teams like Ultra who are never been renowned as like a strong Hardpoint team going on Hardpoint records. So it's a very weird situation in the league currently, where I think that we're now in a point where we have so many teams that are just struggling to get results and are going to continue to struggle to get results unless they make drastic changes.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to like the game as well. Like I think this game exposes a lot of teams' flaws when it comes to like bad teamwork. Because breaking out of situations, spawn traps, like really in unideal situations just requires a lot of teamwork because of how open the maps are. On top of that, the map set also is just like super AR heavy, and like every team in the league, I'm sure, built their roster with the intention of having, SMG players and AR players. And right now, it's like a lot of the hills, a lot of the way the game is played, you can get away with running 3 to 4 assault rifles. And it's not to say that they can't like necessarily shoot the gun well. It's more so like the positioning, right? The discipline that it takes to like run an AR successfully. And maybe some of these teams are just kind of struggling with that on top of all the other stuff that, encompasses the current game we're playing. So I don't know, man. It's tough just to see how big the gap is here in the league. But at the very least, the middle of the pack is pretty entertaining to watch. I think those were some of our more entertaining matches this year or this major.
So 100%. I kind of feel this way, Mark. I think obviously Ultra and FaZe are set, right? Like I think FaZe, like even though they got kind of shit on by Ultra this weekend, I think they'll improve. They'll be back battling with Ultra for that #1 spot later in the year. But I really want to see OpTic and New York improve. Obviously New York, right? I will say I don't think we got a real showing out of New York. I think this was kind of an anomaly weekend for them. They're probably super down about it, but I think they'll battle back and perform well in this next stage. And as far as OpTic goes, like I really want to see them improve. Them in New York, right? I want to see our top 4 be competitive across the board, which I think it's fair to say those are our solidified top 4, even after this weekend. And I want to see those matchups between FaZe and Ultra with those two teams be a lot closer because I think, they now that, these rosters have formed in the offseason, they have the talent. Every single one of these top 4 teams are equal in talent, in my opinion. It's all about who knows and plays the game better. As far outside of that, though, I need some blow it ups, Mark. I know Chris said the middle of the pack teams are they're a little bit more entertaining, but I really feel like even them, that middle of the pack, like the 5 through 8, could improve as well. And I don't know necessarily if they're going to improve through just getting better at the game. I think there's an opportunity here to capitalize on some of these players that are coming out of challengers that look dominant. That could really improve their squad. Boston is one of them. Like, Boston, I think, should absolutely make a roster move. And I think it's going to take that, right? It's going to take multiple of these teams making, whether it be hard changes or what, roster changes to get better, to solidify those middle of the pack positions. We kind of saw this weekend, especially after the online portion, like there's some weak spots on some of these teams. Yes, there's weak spots in their map pool. There's weak spots in their just how they play or their consistency. But at the end of the day, if you want to ever compete against that top four, you've got to have the talent to back it up. Even if you play the game perfectly, there's such a talent diff in the league currently between the top four and everybody else that's where it needs to happen. And we saw it with Carolina, right? Carolina was horrible. Those guys were the worst team in the world. And then they made a roster change to two people. Like, obviously, Real's situation was a little bit different, but they dropped Gotta Rex. They got TJ Halley in. They got Fellow in. And they looked way better. I think other teams need to take from that. Like, stop waiting so long to make up for your bad roster, decisions in the offseason and make changes. LAT, those guys, they got to make changes. They're not going to improve with that squad. And we could go top bottom and list them all, and almost all of them could use a roster change. Like, maybe Miami doesn't have to, but outside of that, Rocker, I think they earn themselves a little bit more time. But everybody else should be on blow it up watch. They should be on the phone with these challenger players that played well this weekend. That FaZe Black squad looked better than almost everybody else in the venue. There's multiple teams that have really talented players and challengers that could improve all these squads. And I think if we really are going to get serious about this discussion of like where this middle of the pack can go, it's going to come in the next 2 weeks from roster changes.
Yeah, 100%. I think that if you look at the, 4th to 8th teams, all those guys maybe are in situations where they're happy with their placement. Like, I think Minnesota come in, they're probably looking at it, 2 weeks ago, 4th place and 4 wins in a row going into the online, onto the LAN portion. They're probably happy with that, but at the same time, they might be in a situation now where they're a golden opportunity. They've just came off a 4th place placement, and although I think that, they have bounced back and have a lot to build off of, now might be an ideal time for them to make that kind of big change that, pushes them into that top 3 conversation, because they clearly had, a lot of issues going into it. Maybe it's one of those ones where they fixed them all and this is the right roster for them. But at the same time, is now the ideal time to pack a bunch of the roster? Could you in 2 or 3 weeks' time seeing them do poorly online and come into the next major and do poorly? I could. Personally, for me, I think it might be a good time for them to have that conversation at the very least. And I think that same thing goes for the likes of Seattle as well. I think that they came in, they kind of performed around the conversation where we had them, 5th, 6th. It's still a good result for them at the end of the day. I think in some situations they could have came top 8, top 12. 5th, 6th is probably around the point where they feel like, oh, that's a decent placement. But again, I still think that those teams could improve. But then again, it comes down to the organizations themselves. I think that some organizations are obviously less likely to want to invest and make obviously these big wholesale changes. But the teams that I mentioned, Seattle and Minnesota, I think that they've clearly showed that there are teams that want to compete and potentially like contend for championships. So I think if they're wanting to do that, I think that, changes in those positions could be something that they look at, because I think that at the end of the day, these are teams that are now, finishing 4th, 5th, 6th. If you, make some slight improvements, you can push yourself into that top 3 and, get yourself into the grand finals, get yourself in the conversation of potentially winning a tournament.
I think there's probably only 2. Obvious. I think there's probably only 2 teams that don't make roster changes, and one of them just bought themselves some times with a 4th place finish, and then the other one I think is just LAG, because I think the way they lost their series was a pretty heartbreaking series, and they could have easily been in the same spot that Rocker was. And obviously, like Jay, they're just like they're a friendship team. Like, they are good, they're talented, but at the end of the day, like, these guys are players that are all familiar with each other. A couple of them have played on certain rosters or planned on playing together, so they probably won't change much. or if at all. But I think every other team outside of Rocker will probably make at least one change.
But to your point, though, Chris, Heretics are very similar to the LAG. They're
and
a friendship
Heretics,
squad.
yeah.
They're Spanish speaking, so they would have to pick someone up who speaks Spanish. I think they're a little bit more limited in their options.
Well, they have a substitute that they were going to end up playing, and I don't really know if they tried him out and maybe they just didn't like the way he played and they swapped him out with Journey right away, or if there was some other issue.
Journey didn't play too hot this weekend, so
yeah, and Journey didn't play too hot. I mean, what if they just get another Spanish? I think the Spanish had a decent run in the Challengers stuff as well, right, Mark?
I think that's possible. Yeah,
they got top 6. The other Spanish guys, I could see them bringing Eric Boom in. Those guys finished 3rd. Yeah, they finished 3rd in the Challengers event, and Eric Boom has played really well. My team personally played against their squad, and Eric Boom performed really well against us. So, speaking from my own experience this weekend, I think that he could definitely be an improvement from Journey. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them bringing in Eric Boom coming into this next stage, because I think that at the end of the day, he's been putting in some serious amounts of work into Challengers, and obviously he's been performing well. They've, in all the cups that have led into this point, and even this weekend, they've been consistently performing 2nd, 3rd, etc. So I think Eric Boom's one of those guys that could definitely come in and make a difference for those guys, because at the end of the day, Journey statistically is not performing at the best.
The most obvious change for me, and I'll be really mind blown if it doesn't happen, is this Seattle squad. aBeZy is probably their best, if not second best player, but he's an AR. He was supposed to be an AR for this squad. He was the best AR in Challengers last year, arguably. And their weakest player is their AR player. So to me, I absolutely think this team should look at either benching or dropping Alec, and moving aBeZy to that role of the main AR on the squad and picking up a good sub player. That's what this team desperately needs, is some pace. Obviously, we talk about the way Kyler plays with a sub. It's a little bit inconsistent. I feel like if they could get a good sub in Challengers to match with Hook, this squad could look infinitely better. Infinitely. Because I think that aBeZy kid is gross. And I think him being on his natural role and letting another sub come in and fill that slot, that will, in my opinion, solidify their middle of the pack. Obviously, I don't expect to see iLLeY play as good as he did consistently this weekend. I think he had when the league first started, when you guys remember when Seattle came out their first 2 weekends, iLLeY was frying. It was what the hell is this? And then he went quiet for a month. And then he come here this weekend and he absolutely world stars. So same thing. I think if this team makes a change, I think they'll be, right up there with the Rocker. And for Rocker, Chris, I think, the way Awakening played this weekend, I don't think this team should make a change right now. But if someone's on the hot seat on that team, I think it is absolutely Awakening, because to me, he was so inconsistent across the board. He would start some series with dub neg and S&D and Hardpoint, and then get 2 and 10 in S&D, and then bring his KD back in the control. But he was getting world starred in the most 2 important modes. So me, I think they should be on that watch, right? Of getting someone else to replace them, because I think that's another factor of dude, with as competitive as the league is with these top 4 teams and everybody else, you need to make every improvement you can on the talent side of things and the consistency side of things if you want a chance to compete.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about teams on the lower end, we got Vegas. I think Vegas just needs to get rid of Purge. He had a terrible series this weekend and then a good series, but at the end of the day, I just think the way he's played, even in the online matches,
he's the worst online. For sure.
He was absolutely the worst online. I think this team has some potential. I think Standy's fine. I think Nero is really good, and I think Attach even has been playing really good for this team and keeping them competitive in a lot of series. Where even though the map counts sometimes might not look pretty, I feel like they are put in positions to win these series, and sometimes even win a couple maps against some good teams, and they just don't end up closing out. And then that's with people having insane outlier statistics. So Purge probably on the way out soon if I were a betting man. And then what other teams do we got here?
The Thieves, the most obvious.
Oh wait, the Thieves, Thieves in Boston. Thieves need to blow it up. They need a 2-person change. They're completely terrible at one mode, and then they're lackluster in all the other ones. I think Dan Ghosty had a 1.4 over 2 or 3 maps, and they were getting shit on the whole time. Cammy has still yet to play good or consistent. I think the first 2 candidates to go, if they're making a 2-man roster change, is going to be Afro, and it's going to be Cammy. I just think that they're too inconsistent and they're just not meshing well with the team. And I think Dan Ghosty played fine on LAN, and I think people brought him on there for a reason.
He had the highest KD of the whole tournament. He only played one series, but he did finish with the highest KD.
Yeah, and I think Joe Deceives, obviously being in the young end, unless there's internals there, he still's got a lot of potential. I just think the whole roster from the top to bottom, you just need to almost complete rebuild. And then Boston, man. Boston's the confusing one, simply because they have a lot of good pieces on there that I think are talented in their own right, but they just have not been able to put together. The person that you would not really see dropping a 1.4 in their match dropped the 1.4. Slasher, he played phenomenal. They ended up losing the series. Priesta, I think, has played pretty decently online, and I don't think he's anywhere near the problem. I think their biggest issues here is with their sub duo, and with I think Snoopy kind of being the face of that team in terms of like their like long-term project and how much faith they put into him coming into the season. I think the clear outlier here is gonna be Cap. I think Cap has he's been kind of inconsistent. I don't think this game fits his play style sometimes. I think like we've talked about it, having patience and the like is super important. And Cap is kind of a rogue player, so Slasher is probably not too happy about that. If I were betting,
we did see obviously FaZe Black won the challengers thing, and they all played well throughout the whole tournament. But Crimp had like a 1.4 in the final. And Crimp's been in the league before, right? Like, what team do you think he ends up on? Yeah, he's been on Boston before. What team do you think he ends up on? I think for me, he's like the lock pick, like number one draft pick, so to speak. Picked up.
Yeah, I could see him landing on Boston. Sorry to cut you off. I could see him also landing on Seattle, just because I think that they need to move aBeZy to an assault rifle. But go ahead and say what you were going to say, Mark.
No, I was just going to say, I think the biggest issues with these two teams are their compositions. So, like, if you're bringing in, say, like, use Kremp as an example, right? If you're bringing him in, you're switching him with a like-for-like player, it's the overall composition. If you look at Toronto, for example, right? You know each and every one of those players, what they're bringing to the table. You've got Insight. He's going to be the backline. He's going to be the guy that just, plays his life, does what he has to do. He's going to, clutch up an S&D, blah, blah, etc. Scrap, he's just going to put damage down. He's going to be just that guy that just chows everything he wants to. Dylan Envoy, he's going to do the dirty work for CleanX. CleanX is going to chow. These teams don't have clear identity and roles within their team, defined sort of, I guess, strengths. And I think that's one of the things that you need to look at, where you could bring in a player like Kremp. Obviously, he's just won challengers. But at the end of the day, if you put him into the wrong system, it's not going to work. I think at the end of the day, these teams need to define what they want as a collective whole in terms of what they want each individual player to do in a specific role, and then they need to go from there. Because I think that if you just look at the LAT team and you look at the Boston team, it just looks like a weird match, like a weird mix of players. Like you look at Boston, for example, you have Snoop and Capsino. I feel like you need one of those guys to be like that Dylan Envoy type player, where you know what you're going to get from him in terms of consistent plays. He's going to make the right plays at the right moments. They don't have that. Those are two guys that are very like X Factor type players, and you have them both in the same role. So you don't really have that level of consistency there. So for me, I think it's more so about them defining what they want to build collectively going forward, rather than just like being like, okay, let's just bring this guy in and hope for the best. Because I think you've seen that throughout the history of the CDL, where teams just make like for like changes and nothing changes in terms of results. The best player in Challenger gets brought in, and regardless of that being the case, they still do shit. So like, I think for me, the biggest thing would be just getting the composition on point and making sure that everyone's in their right specific roles and knowing what they want to do first and foremost. But I definitely do think that teams could make changes to improve them, don't get me wrong.
I guess my question would be, like, I know, Mark, you wanted to talk about the hardpoint changes. Do you think that the changes that happened benefit any of these teams to, like, let's not talk about the top four to start. Let's talk about everyone else. Do you think it benefits any of them enough to, like, justify not making a change? Do you think them making a change, they double benefit from both the change and the new rules? Like, because something to also consider is these challenger players have been playing on this new patch for weeks now, right? They've got the most practice, and the league starts up in 2 weeks from now. So I guess that's kind of my question to both of you is, like, do these new hardpoint spawns and hills change anything for any of these squads?
I think that it's one of those ones where, the likes of 100 Thieves who have not been able to, grind out a hardpoint win, I definitely think they're sitting there like, this is great. This is great that the Hardpoints can play changing, because they've just been getting absolutely destroyed in every single series. So I think that those sort of teams will be positive about it, but do I necessarily believe that that's going to change the outcome of their season? I don't think so. I think that regardless, they're probably going to still find similar troubles. I do think that Hardpoint has drastically changed, especially on some of those, the sort of bigger maps like Terminal and Invasion. It feels a lot different. So for me, I think that, teams that are maybe like specifically good on those maps, or specifically bad on those maps, it's going to definitely have a big advantage for those guys. But overall, I don't think it's going to change too much, to be honest with you. So I think that, the composition in terms of what roles are running, etc., that has not really changed. You're still going to see the similar like 2-3 ARs. So I don't think it changes much in that regard. But at the same time, I do think that teams like LA Thieves must be sitting there like, yes, thank God, because we've not been able to scratch a Hardpoint win together. So they're definitely buzzing.
What about you, Chris?
Yeah, I'm on the same boat. I mean, I don't think it's going to change shit, to be honest. Even like it's nice that some teams will get a nice little reset. It's almost like a fresh start in the game mode. But at the end of the day, like the fundamental issues with all these teams and their pacing and the way they even just like think about the game, like it's not going to change much. The spawns arguably got worse. I don't think there's a world where like it necessarily makes anyone better. I think it just kind of maybe stalls out the inevitable for some of these teams. So yeah, either way, I'm not a fan of the new changes. At least I'm not a fan of a couple of them.
Yeah, for me, I think if you look at these top teams, they just do the simple things right. If you watch S&D, they get into numbers advantages, they group together, they trade out kills. On Hardpoint, when they're breaking L's, they group together, they make sure they're going together. And as easy as to say as like an analyst or someone that's watching, that is generally what it comes down to a lot of the times in these Call of Duty matches. It's whoever has the best teamwork, whoever has these things. Because everyone in the league, especially now, everyone's got analysts, coaches, everyone knows what right play to make in most situations, or like how they want to play certain hills. But when it comes down to it and you're in the game, it's how you communicate as a team, how you work as a team, and all these sort of factors that come into play. And I think that these are the biggest things that you see the differential between teams like Toronto and then the rest, because their teamwork is night and day compared to these guys. And I think that looking at like LAT, for example, they just don't look like a collective four that is all bought into the same system, the same how they want to act as a team outside of the game, everything. I just think they're just very individual. So for me, like teams like those, I think that are going to really continue to struggle regardless of whatever patch we're playing on, to be honest, because I think they need to really fix up on those little things. It's easy to say, watch and see on Codcaster, but generally, I think it's just one of those things where you have to really fine-tune those little moments in game, because clearly they're doing something right when it comes down to practice. You hear from LAT, you hear from other coaches, you hear from their players that they're doing well in practice. I even heard this weekend that they were winning like 70-80% of scrims. So like clearly something's going right for them in practice. And then when it comes to the matches, either our players getting nervous or there's some sort of dynamic shift is changing within their team from scrims to matches that is resulting in them just losing every hard point. So I think they need to get to the root of that problem first before.
How fast do we think these teams make changes then?
Wait, when's the first match?
February 16th, so about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I think you'll see changes start to be made within this week.
Yeah, me too. I think there's going to be a bunch of teams that come in this week and like after they've seen the likes of Carolina, although ultimately they didn't end up getting a great result, I think they, showed that being proactive in terms of making changes can obviously help them going
I'm willing to bet
forward.
by this next weekend we will have rumors of teams either making the changes or teams already scrimming with their new fourths, and then there'll be leaks on like social media, and the announcements will come like the following week.
What do you think comes first, Boston and Seattle? Well, actually, I guess my question is, do you think Seattle even makes a change? Like, I know we agree we think they should, and we know who it should be. Like, do you think they make that leap, that aBeZy to main and Alec dropped?
I think the first team to make a change is going to be Boston, because they just have always showed initiative when it comes to making changes. The second team to make a change, it's got to be Vegas, and then Seattle.
The thing is, though, I don't think Vegas are the most likely to make a change, just because what we know from like a
they don't have the leverage
business
either.
perspective, I don't think they're going to invest in terms of bringing in that other guy, and like you just said, Pat, I think they just definitely need that like leader type figure. So I think that if you look at Boston and you look at Seattle, I think they're definitely the two most likely to make changes. Who should make the change first? I think you could probably make the argument in Vegas, but will they make the change first? I think that it's more likely that the other teams are more proactive.
But here's my thing. Like, if you're a challenger player, right, and you're like, let's say your stock is high and it's very likely you get picked up, and Boston call, Seattle call, and Vegas call, I'm taking that Vegas call last. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So that and that goes for a lot of these teams. I'm taking the Thieves call last. All these teams that have played bad, and this is why it's important to make these changes fast, right? Because if you wait, and this is what I was talking about before this event, we kind of knew Thieves sucked, right? We kind of all agreed. They waited now until after the event. Vegas waited until after the event. But now there's teams that are just better than them that are going to want to make changes, and they're going to pick the best players first. And we know that. Players are going to go to where they have the best chance to succeed. And like I said, if Boston's calling me and I'm the number one challenger player, I'm not caring about what the Thieves are saying or what Vegas is saying right now because I'm trying to get on that Boston squad. And I think this is going to be – it's like a trickle-down effect. Like, Boston's going to get the number one pick. Seattle may get the number two. And then it's like Thieves and Vegas or whoever else is making changes are then going to be left with the – worst option of all these roster moves.
And that's why I think teams like Minnesota right now, regardless of them, overperforming or whatever that may be, I think Minnesota right now, it could be crazy. I know they've just came top 4. I know they've exceeded whatever expectations we had of them. But at the same time, I think now is the ideal time to put yourself in the position to propel yourselves above the likes of OpTic and put yourselves in that conversation of potentially getting to grand finals. So I think that Minnesota should be having those conversations. Will they? I don't know. I feel like they're probably going to just keep the same squad for next event. Because at the end of the day, I think that as an organization, they are one of those teams that, although they have been proactive in the past of making changes, I think after a good result, they're probably not going to go ahead and like shake things up too much. But you don't know. You never know. I think that, Looney and those guys over there are definitely very smart when it comes down to Call of Duty and how they can succeed as a team. So I think they'll definitely make the best choices for them as a squad, but I think that at the same time, now might be one of those situations where them getting top 4 might actually screw them long term, because I think that if they make the choice to not make a change now, it may end up come back to bite them in the ass, going forward.
It was the same thing with that Surge team in years past, right? Like, that Surge team would randomly get like a top 4, but it's like we knew what that team had. It had 2 good players and 2 bad players, and they didn't make a change. They stuck it out, and then that whole roster blew up, and they lost everybody. But if they would have made a change, they would have been a little bit more proactive when they had Sib and Pred on their squad. They could have made changes to make their propel themselves up into that top 4 and even compete, and they didn't. And I think it's obviously a tough call to make, right? You just got top 4, but I feel like you need to be a little bit more future thinking and prepare for the fact that if you wait, there may be no one else to pick up when you want to make a change. So I agree. I think it should be on everybody's radar.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the more than likely thing that's going to happen now going into this like kind of little period that we have now is you're going to see teams like LAT make a change, because they're always been an organization that want to succeed. They want to win championships, and I think that they've built a good kind of core 4 there where they have a bunch of talent, but they've just got the wrong mix of players.
LAT do not drop Cammy and Afro immediately, and I'm not saying that because I have something against Europeans. I just think Dan Ghosty is good, and I think Joe Deceives still has a lot of potential, and I think Afro and Cammy are just simply the outliers on this roster. If they don't get dropped, I will be mind blown.
Yeah.
Both of them, right? Not just one.
Both of them. If it's one, I mean, thanks for trying, but like...
Yeah, 100%. I think that, I've obviously got a bit of bias towards the European guys, but at the end of the day, I think that Cammy and Afro have definitely not been performing anywhere near the level that they should be.
And not where they were, right?
At the end of the day, this is also my question, though, right? So, like, a lot of people are saying, pick up challenger players, but at what point do the pro teams look at the rest of the challenger pool outside of FaZe Black and realize, we're not interested in any of them? And players like, for example, Arcides, if he were to get dropped, Cammy, if he were to get dropped, Afro, if they were to get dropped, Capsule, if they were to get dropped, end up on another league team.
Yeah.
Like, I think this would be like the first time this has happened in a while, because I feel like most of the time, last couple of years, the players that got dropped were just not in the league for a while, or like maybe missed the stage before they got repicked up. You know what I mean?
But it's tough, right? Because getting dropped like is a nuclear bomb to your stock. You know, no matter what. And because basically, think about it, Chris. Like, I get where you're getting at. Like, once the top challenger talent is gone, you kind of have to make a choice. But dude, if like you're getting dropped, you're basically, the entire league is telling them like, this was the worst player on our team. Like, there may be even more reasons outside of why it's getting dropped. And it's tough because the players in the leagues who do get dropped become kind of known quantities because you go off what you've seen, whereas the challenger players, appear to have a bit more upside because they could come in and fry, and you won't know. I mean, we've seen that before.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's tough. I mean, I do think there are a couple outliers, like Capsule, maybe one. He's been bounced around the league a little bit before, but Alec, I think, is in a rough spot because once he got dropped on from Atlanta, he went to LAG and had a really bad year. Like, to me, this was his bounce back opportunity, right? Like, last year he was bad, and we all agree he was bad. This year was his chance to turn it around, and I don't think he has. So it's like, would another league team take a chance on him after?
I mean, there's obviously exceptions. Some of those players are probably not going to make it back if they do, but I was just mainly just naming certain pros because at the end of the day, when you're making these changes, like, for example, I'll give you like a good one because this was obvious. This is an obvious one. When looking at a player like Afro, if he were to get let go from LA Thieves because it's just not working out, another pro team could be like, okay, do we want to pick up a challenger player, or is Afro better than that challenger player? You see what I'm saying? So yeah, it's different for every player, right? It's not going to be the same. But yeah, I know exactly what you mean. There's definitely a couple players where I feel like if they get dropped, they won't be back in the league for a very long time, if at all. So unfortunate, but I mean, it's just the way it is, man. It's probably happened to all of us at one point. So it is what it is.
Yeah, and before we move on, I just want to say, like, I think as well it's hard as well because I think that you can't just consistently just rebuild teams over and over again and expect success. Look at the likes of LAG, right? They've built a new roster pretty much every year. If you compare it to Toronto, their roster is essentially a sort of continued team from the original 10-man roster that they had. Yeah. There's been small changes, like one player in, one player out, every single couple months, or like, every single season. But it's pretty much been the same roster that's just made small changes.
But it's different though, because Toronto always showed life. Like, even with their original team, like, they were okay. And then they made another change and they got better. Then they made another change. They won an event in Modern Warfare 2019. And then obviously Cold War, right? You guys had that year where you guys were really good. And then that's kind of where, like, now it's like you were already at a point where you guys were super good. And then you ended up like banking on a rookie, which it's kind of the same thing that people are trying to do now.
But
and he ended up being basically the best player in the world. So it is hard. I know what you mean. But at the end of the day, I mean, whenever you're a team that is complete ass and there's a player on your team or players on your team, for example, that have not been traditionally good for a while, it's just at one point, it's just, yeah, sure, maybe in an ideal world, in an ideal team, those players wouldn't struggle as much as they do. But the sad reality of it is they're not going to get that world. They're not going to get that reality anymore. You got to just do something because, it's just the way of the land, man. It's happened. I think it's happened I feel like that even happened to me in my career. So, I mean, we'll see. But I suspect a lot of changes. If there isn't a lot of changes, I'll probably be ranting about it on the flank and just being absolutely mind-blown because these teams are just garbage.
Yeah. I think I would say the top two, we are all in agreement here that I think that there's a lot of improvements to be made outside of that. But we're going to go into some community questions now, and there's been some interesting questions actually from you guys from last week. So the first question we have here is from Abdullah Gaming, and he has a question for myself actually. He says, question for MarkyB, were you close to bringing in Scrappy at the end of Vanguard season, or were you always going to stick?
Yeah, why didn't you do that?
Yeah, I was hoping you guys would. I was even talking about. I'm like, dude,
that's quite a good question because that's maybe something that's not ever been spoke about, to be honest, like in a public setting. But yeah, there was definitely conversations about bringing Scrappy towards champs, going into champs, even like 2 weeks before champs, which would have been a crazy change, obviously, considering we went into.
Bro, I think you guys would have actually placed better.
I mean,
Jesus,
I don't want
bro.
to say anything, but I think that obviously it would have been crazy, considering obviously we went through the majority of Cold War together, and then we went through that whole season together. To then, make a change 1 or 2 weeks before champs, it would have been a bit crazy, and it was one of those ones that may have been a bit of a gamble. I think for me, from my perspective, we had the mentality that we trusted our team, that we believed that we could still do well at that event, and we didn't believe we needed a change. I mean, obviously, hypothetical situation, like we could have potentially made that change and done better, but at the end of the day, it's one of those ones
I just remember when he subbed in for you guys and played New York Subliners, and he was the best player in the lobby.
Yeah,
and he didn't scrim. He's never played with you guys before. He's never played against the likes of the people he was playing against, and he was literally the best player in the lobby. And once he did that, I was like, whenever you guys were having your struggles, I'm like, dude, they should just bring this guy in, bro. Like, that guy was.
We knew he was going to be on the roster, like, going into the next year. Obviously, I left Toronto at the end of that season, but, like, we knew that he was going to be on the starting roster in the next season. It was more so just the fact of, is now the right time to bring him in, or should we wait it out type of thing? Obviously, in hindsight, we ended up finishing, like, top 6 that champ, so in hindsight, maybe it was a good gamble to take, but at the end of the day, at the time, if I'm to rewind to that point, I don't know if I would have made a different decision. I'm still happy that we kind of ended off the team the way it did, but as a coach, as a competitor, I want to win every single competition I'm in. So in my head at the same time, I'm like, if we'd made that change, would that have made a difference, or could we have potentially won champs that year? Maybe, but it's all hypothetical and all a kind of situation that you don't really know how it would have played out at the end of the day. I think for players as well, it's important that they come at the right time. I think that if Scrap comes in underprepared and sort of thrown into a new situation, it can go 1 or 2 ways. He could have ended up coming out with a bad result at champs and carried that into the next year, whereas I think he just came in fresh next year, ready to go. So I think there's so many different sort of ways of looking at it.
I think you guys made the right call at the end of the day. Like, you never know. Like, he could have came into that team, and if he would have played bad, like, imagine his stock would have just got ruined. Like, coming into that would have been crazy. Could have been in a completely different world nowadays. But let's go on to the next question. We got Joey Bats, and it's not even a question, it's a comment. He said, OpTic hasn't been good since 2017. Wait, did OpTic win an event in Vanguard?
Yeah, they did.
This guy's just an OpTic hater.
They won their home series, though.
I think it's Pat's ringer, bro.
It's not my ringer, but they won their home series, I believe, right?
The thing is, every OpTic event has a home series, pretty much. Like they're always the fan favorites. So I don't think that typically means a thing for them, but I do think it's an advantage to them at the same time. But I do kind of agree that in terms of like the OpTic banner, if you compare them to like a sports team, you put them in the conversation of those like, in basketball, like the Lakers, the Celtics, and you look at in every sport, they're like that sort of main team. And they have definitely been underperforming that banner as a whole.
They're still a good team. They're just, I mean, if you take away the OpTic name,
it's impossible not to be a good team. Look at the rosters that they've put together.
Look at the brand and organization.
But the problem is the rosters that they've had since the dynasty broke up, right? So let's World War II to now. The rosters that organization as a whole has had have been insane. They've had always top 4, top 3 talent rosters in the game, but they haven't been able to produce wins. I think since then they've had 2 actual wins, and it's the Vanguard one and the one in Black Ops 4, the kickoff in BO4. And it's like, when you look at how much money that organization has spent on salaries and getting players of this talent, this, the skill level, I think 2 wins across 6-7 years is absolutely worth the conversation of like, these guys haven't been as good. I mean, look at like just Toronto, right? Toronto by himself since the CDL era, and they didn't come in with like a ton of money, spending a ton of money getting the best players. They made a damn 10-man squad in the beginning of the game, or the beginning of the CDL, and then they just picked from and improved their roster over time. They've made infinitely more finals and championships in the CDL era. So I think it is worth the conversation of like, something, in my opinion, has drastically been different since like the prime OpTic gaming. and what we've seen in the last 5-6 years.
Well, if you look at the prime OpTic gaming, they essentially brought in, players that had all won and had success, you know what I mean? Whereas now I feel like over the last 5 years, they've obviously brought in players that are good, but not players that are winning every event. They've kind of brought in that talent. They've brought
Well, that's because
flashy type players. They've not brought in guys that just get the job done, get W's on the board.
Well, that's because the players they want, the players they actually want are just unattainable. They want the players on FaZe.
Yeah, Simp.
They're going to want the players on Toronto,
that's
etc.
just not realistic. You
exactly.
can't. Yeah, I mean, it was the same thing. I'm sure they wanted my EG team. Hell, they ended up buying them right after we had broke up at the end. I guess to me, to Mark's point, they build rosters of talent. They don't build rosters of winners. And I think that's the difference that you see. They'll always be flashy. They'll always be popular. They'll always have the stream numbers. They'll always, still be in the conversation of top teams, but they don't consistently get the job done.
I think OpTic just genuinely needs a really good coach. And I'm not saying they don't have good coaches or analysts or anything like that. I just think I don't know. They just need somebody that's nerdy but still I don't know, just not.
They had that though. They had Cinder.
They need somebody.
Had Troy Cinder, and then he goes to New York, and then he wins 4 events in a year or whatever. They literally had that. He didn't.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's a player respect thing. I don't know. I
that those players don't want. I mean, this could be complete.
They had
nonsense.
Rambo. They literally had Rambo. They had Rambo and Cinder. What more could you ask for?
I mean,
Rambo's coping though.
Rambo's definitely not a bad coach, but at the same time, Rambo retired a long time ago.
I feel like you're coping, bro. I think there's just a mentality difference in that organization. There is a winning mentality on other teams, and to me, it never feels like the priority of that OpTic squad. It never has. And that's just my take on it. The environment matters, the culture matters, and to me, there's just more priorities. It's just that simple. They're not even the mentality of the players. And I like the Pred pickup, and I like the Kenny pickup. I think those match that. But even before that, look at Dashy's roster. Dashy has had the best shot in Call of Duty since basically he came into the scene. But again, I don't think he's been around that winning thing. I think, players didn't like being on teams with Crim6, right? Because Crim6 bitched and all he cared about was winning. And if he wasn't winning, nothing was okay. I just feel like that mentality has shifted out. And it's not in that organization. That's my opinion.
Could be.
No, I think that's not a bad take. I think if you look at, although other teams may watch it and think, what are they doing? This is pure Fagaze. If you look at Toronto, and I know I feel like I bang on about Toronto a lot, but they are doing all the extra outside of the game stuff to another level compared to these other organizations. You have you see little videos of them doing tennis ball drills where they're throwing tennis balls at each other, building their hand-eye coordination before games. I know this might not even be factors when it comes down to it, but if you see that team, how they operate at events behind the scenes, we see them fans, most of you guys are going to see them walk out on stage and how they play and perform. But if you see them behind the scenes and you see how they operate as a team and as an organization compared to other rosters and in comparison to other organizations, it's night and day. They're like an actual sports team. You see them, they're together. They're doing shit together all the time. And they're just doing all these extra things that a lot of other teams and organizations don't prioritize. So I think this is one of those things. They're just night and day. And I think that's one thing that the OpTic, although they have a great organization, great fan base, they have great staff there, I think they've not been able to build that great background staff that's been able to propel them into that other level and be a big skill gap in a way, because I think that is actually a gap for Toronto that's allowed them to succeed throughout their years at the CDL, is that they've had that better organization behind them in terms of not money, but in terms of they know what they're doing. And I think that's the biggest thing.
It's like that too. To some extent, in terms of preparation, they obviously have Crowder there. I know he kind of shares that mentality you're mentioning, but yeah, I mean, I think it's an environment and a culture just difference that I don't think people realize.
Yeah, and before we end off the show, I just want to say, make sure you guys put your comments below. Make sure you guys ask any questions we have for future episodes. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed tonight's episode. Hopefully you guys enjoyed Major 1. I think that this stage and this season as a whole is going to be absolute chaos. I think we're going to consistently see crazy results going into the rest of the season. So make sure you guys continue to tune in. Make sure you guys subscribe. Make sure you guys drop your comments and your questions below. And I'll make sure you guys go to prizepicks.com/reverse sweep and use code reverse sweep for our first deposit match of up to $100. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week.
Later.